Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. I bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and author interviews. And this week I'll be talking with one of my favorite people that I've met recently. She's actually the audiobook narrator for Adventures on Terra, Book 1 Beginnings, the woman of 1,000 voices, Miss Jill Smith.
Hello.
And thank you, Joe, for coming on to the podcast. I know you're a very busy woman. You have lots of projects that you work on a regular basis, not just audiobook narration, but you're also an author yourself. You write horror suspense novels and also LGBTQ romance under the pen name J.A. Rock. They are some very interesting titles. We'll talk about that, of course, in a little bit. But for now, I just want to say thank you for showing up and taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I know it's a little weird, Jill. Jill and I have been talking for like weeks and weeks, working on the narration for audio Adventures on Terra. But this is kind of a little more formal than we're used to, but it's so fun and cool. It's just a nice conversation between people that we're working at a project. I like to say online friends, maybe at least.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, maybe that's too far. Okay, but okay.
No, definitely.
Thank you for talking to me. That was actually really fun. I love talking to people whose work I enjoy, whether they're LitRPG authors or audiobook narrators. What inspired me to talk to you in this particular fashion was that I actually talked to a different audiobook narrator, Jeff Hayes, who does a lot of audiobook narration within the LitRPG community. Like he's decided to kind of focus on our growing genre because he kind of has an edge in that he did a book, it did really well, and so he's picking off a lot of the LitRPG community, which is great. He does a really good work. I figured my audiobook narrator is amazing as well, and I know there are a lot of actually female authors that are dedicating their time to writing in the genre realm. Like, well, she does great lady voices. Why can't she be like even better? So that's in part what inspired me to kind of want to talk to you, besides just having a nice conversation with somebody, who I like.
Yeah,
okay.
No, that's great. I'm really glad to get a chance to talk to you too, because this was such a fun project for me. So I'm excited to hear more about your process and the genre and have a conversation about it. So,
it's a fun genre. I know it's not for everybody, but it is to me one of the most fun things about the LitRPG genre and the community as a whole is its openness and its welcoming attitude to new authors like myself. A lot of the people who are doing really well, like broken in the top 100 on Amazon, are just first-time writers. So it's a very welcoming community who's tolerant, a little more tolerant of like grammar errors and spelling errors than maybe some other more established genres. And we're very okay with like stories that aren't perfect and still just loving them and enjoying them, being voracious readers of them. So it's a cool genre that I'm so passionate about that I not only have a podcast that I dedicated to the genre, but also I eventually wrote my own book and we made an audiobook together. So we have our little audiobook baby that's going to come out hopefully in the next couple weeks.
Heck yeah. I'm so excited. Yeah, and I think what's so cool too is that this was kind of a new to me subgenre. Like I had not heard of LitRPG, but I feel like I was immediately like, yes, I am so on board with this. So that's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I could kind of tell that this particular subgenre was new for you, but I think you still liked it. I'm like, oh, this is cool. I want our genre to be as welcoming and as approachable to people who aren't necessarily hardcore gamers as they are for like the hardcore fans. I want people to come in this and say, oh, this is cool. I like fantasy. I like sci-fi. This might be something else I'm into. I'm kind of a casual gamer, or I have gaming knowledge, and this is kind of a fun new thing that I can kind of understand. And I think you, in part, epitomize that particular group of people, and that this might not have been something you would have picked up on your own, but once you got into it, you're like, oh, this is kind of neat.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always love hearing about new genres, and it was really cool. I'm a big, sci-fi fantasy fan, and I do see elements of that, coming into play in LitRPG. So it's, just a lot of fun.
No, it's okay. Thank you for saying those nice things. Okay, let's talk about you as an audiobook narrator first. Can you tell me a little about your background? What got you into audiobook narrating? What got you into writing? Because we talked about a little bit already. You're a writer in addition to an audiobook narrator. What got you into those creative things? Was your journey here?
I always knew, like, even when I was a very little kid, that I wanted to be a writer. So I was very dedicated to that from a very early age. My mom is also a writer, so I think maybe that had some influence too, just in terms of, being able to talk with her about books that I was reading and things that she was writing. And she helped me a lot with my own writing. When I was a teenager, I started getting more into theater, which was a little bit strange just because I had been such a shy kid. And I think a lot of people thought, that there's no way I would ever get up in front of people or want to be on stage. But I discovered it and I really, really liked it. And I feel like a lot of my young adulthood or whatever was kind of a push and pull between would I want to try to pursue a career as an actor or a career as a writer? Because I wanted to keep doing both things, but I thought if I was going to make one of them a career, that would kind of take all of my energy, So I was a theater major in college and kind of did that for a while, and then went back to, I still wrote during college, but I really hit writing hardcore after I graduated and started publishing, and really, just kind of found that was sort of what I wanted to be doing. And but I always missed theater, and I had listened to a lot of audiobooks, when I was younger, and still do listen to quite a few, and just kind of wondered if that would be a good way to combine a love of writing with enjoying performance, and just getting to bring a little bit of theater into my writing world as well. So that was kind of how I got interested in doing all of that.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, it does kind of make sense that your theater background would play very heavily into your love of literature, and meshing the two that's audiobook narration. You get to read and you get to contribute to good literature in a very vocal, theatrical way. A lot of the audiobooks that I've listened to are almost just audio plays. And for me, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting new way of appreciating a story, because I've read tons of stories, but when you listen to their audiobooks, there's sometimes some very different nuances that you get with the spoken word that you just miss out on the written word.
Absolutely. Yes. I've definitely found that to be true. And I've even had people say that to me, like if I read some of my own work, at a conference or something, I've had people approach me afterwards and be like, oh, like I read that book that you read from, and now the voice of the main character makes so much more sense to me, like having actually heard it, the way you intended it to be read. So it is funny how, you can bring a different dimension to a story through reading. And I just think that's so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun thing, and plus, hey, it helps pay the bills, both as a writer and that doesn't hurt either.
Right, of course not.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that background information. I'm kind of curious, like, what was your first audiobook that you narrated, and how did you kind of land that particular gig?
Oh, the first audiobook I narrated was Razor Wire by Lauren Gallagher. And that was actually a book that was published through the primary publisher that I work with as a writer. And I had just kind of shot them an email being like, hey, I'm going to try to do this audiobook thing now. So if you ever have a project that you think I might be right to audition for, if you wouldn't mind letting me know. And they did happen to have that one up at the time. And Razor Wire is it's just a very compelling lesbian romance, but also definitely not like a fluffy, touchy-feely romance. It's about a woman in the military who gets raped by a superior officer and has zero allies in trying to prosecute this man or trying to get justice for this crime, and ends up with a very unlikely ally, like a fellow female naval officer who helps her. And it's just a really, really cool book, and I was really happy to get a chance to do that. And it was definitely really nervous about like my first my first audiobook, and especially, you know, dealing with such sensitive like subject matter and everything, and wanting it to be, you know, definitely something very, very different from Terra, you know, which like gives you so many opportunities for like these fun, like, you know, voices and stuff. But having a book that was quite a bit heavier and trying to bring, you know, life to each character. But it was a great experience. I really, really liked narrating that book.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Again, yeah, that's definitely not as fluffy as Adventures on Terra. I'm like, oh, whoa.
Yeah, it's dark. It's dark.
No, but it doesn't. It's still a very important story to tell. That's one of the things I love about sci-fi and fantasy, is that it can be fun, it can be interesting, but at the core of basic every story that I've ever loved is an important theme or message or kernel of truth that kind of resonates with the readers. And I think that's a hallmark of good literature the world over, is that it connects with the audience on some, you know, intimate level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most stories do, you know, or at least the stories that I find the most compelling do have an element of, you know, it doesn't have to be dark and depressing, but an element of like where, you know, truth comes in and it kind of brings things to a more serious level. And that was one of the things I loved so much about Terra, was that there are all these, you know, like it's an adventure story and most of it is really fun, you know, even when people are getting injured or fighting, you know, and everything, there's still an element of fun to it. But the very last part, I won't give spoilers if you don't want like people to know, but you know, but the final chapter was very shocking and very something I really connected with emotionally. And so I really appreciated that about it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that last chapter is like very like sad. I'm like I feel like a very mean person for writing
Yeah, it was pretty mean. Yeah.
But I feel like, okay, I need something at the end to basically compel the main characters to leave their safe little world.
Yeah.
And I probably didn't have to go that far, but it was like, well, I'd kind of set it up already. That was just part of the original plan. I was like, oh man, I don't want to write this, but it kind of had to be written. It was kind of natural consequences of the things that are happening in the larger world. And while book one is a great introduction to this world, the very beginning parts of them are very fluffy and that's not how real worlds are. You know, real worlds aren't always perfect and nice. And as much as I try to interject humor and fun and just great banter between characters, you know, this is a legitimate, you know, world in my mind that has its own problems and that are sort of a reflection of you know, our world. And unfortunately that is one of them.
Yeah. And I you know, I do think it was something that was set up well, and a lot of times main characters do need something big to push them into taking action. When you have kind of a chosen one type story, it often does require a pretty serious catalyst to actually get the person to sort of accept their destiny. Like I'll always remember, you know, when the Harry Potter series started getting really dark, you know, like just how awesome that was, but also how like, you know, like the first couple books were so much fun, and then slowly it just started getting more and more. And it's like, no, if he's actually going to like do this, then he's going to have some serious incentives to like get out there and defeat evil. And so I think it makes perfect sense that you would include that mean chapter.
No, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I agree with you. I felt very much like, oh, part of my childhood died when Harry got all dark, and I was like, oh, that's
got real.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the writing process, especially for something like this, where a lot of people described it as a young adult fiction because they never went through the end of it. Like the beginning part very much just like an introduction to this new world he's taken care of, but eventually that all has to, like anyone's childhood, adolescence, eventually has to end, and you have to be a grown up, and that's kind of the part of the journey in this story, especially at the end and in the next book as well. Like things are dark at the beginning of the next book and things get a little happier afterwards, after things are resolved a little bit. But yeah, it's I'm oddly surprised at how complicated or emotionally variant it is, especially since I wrote it. I'm like, wait, this is not half bad.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other things. What are some other books that you have narrated? Do you know how many books you've narrated?
Yes. So I think Terra was my fourth book. I also narrated Genevieve, Bride of Nevada, which is a historical romance. And that was a lot of fun. So I've done book 1 of the List Conspiracy series by Martha Carr. And that should be coming out very, very soon. I think the series is planned for 6 books. And I'm starting work on book 2 right now. So that's kind of a political sort of international conspiracy thriller. Also a lot of fun, a lot of different characters, a lot of twists and turns. And then Terra.
Hey, and where you go? 4th book. See, so you're kind of like you're still relatively new to the narration process then at this point. So I'm glad that I was able to catch you early then, because I don't think I could afford your prices if you get like super famous all of a sudden.
Thank you. Wow. But yeah, no, still at the beginning of the process for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say, I got about 50 auditions for the auditions for Adventures on Terra, and like once I heard your voice, I was like, oh no, that's it, we're done. You just have such wonderful characters. You I don't know, especially with the female characters, your voice just matched it, and like all the tones and all the sarcasm and all the joke, like just you added such a great layer of development to them. Like, oh yeah, this is, sorry everyone else, you all did wonderful jobs, but this is it. So
thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that we got to work together, because it was a book that I felt a connection with right from the beginning, which, you know, I auditioned for a lot of projects, and I enjoy them for different reasons, but I felt like this one was one where I was like, oh my God, please pick me. Like, I would really love to do this one. So yeah, I'm glad it worked out. So. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you chose to say yes to audition for the project. So you've done 4 the narration books. Now let's talk a little bit about the process of audiobook narrating, because I think it's a fascinating subject for people who aren't familiar with it. I know I wasn't when I first started this process. Like, I had some ideas. I talked to like Jeff Hayes, the only other audiobook narrator that I know, and he kind of walked me through like, oh, this is probably what you should expect. You don't have to rewrite your entire, you know, novel into script form, which I was really glad for, because I had planned to do it that way, like to put, oh, narrator says this, Armand says this, Mary says this, and like that was a lot of work. But he's like, no, you don't have to. But like, let's talk about your experience with the audiobook narrating process. So starting at the beginning, how do you choose which project to audition for?
I think in the beginning, like I said, I would audition for a lot just because I wanted to get established somehow. And so it was more, obviously, when you're looking for jobs through ACX or something, they do, you know, they give you certain filters, so you can look for jobs where they'd be open to a female narrator, or, you know, they want this kind of tone or whatever. So that kind of helped in like the early selection process, you know. So if someone's like, I want the narrator to sound super girly, I would kind of know that probably I shouldn't audition for that one, you know. But so yeah, I just kind of put like just threw a lot of darts at first and like hoped something would stick. And now that I am getting pretty consistent work, I feel like I choose a little bit more carefully. Like, I do kind of look specifically for books where I feel that connection, like even just from the, you know, the audition script. So yeah, I think that's what I'm looking for, is just like projects that I know that I will enjoy, be able to sustain an interest in, because nobody wants an audiobook narrator who's like just going through the motions. You know, you want someone who is equally engaged and as excited about the project, you know, as you are as the author or publisher. So yeah, that's kind of how I choose now.
That's perfect. Do you use any other service besides ACX, which is the audiobook what is it called? What's the
Creation Exchange?
Creation Exchange. Yes.
Creation Exchange, yeah. So far, I have used ACX. I do work with a publisher who is not on ACX, but I still kind of found them tangentially through ACX. So yeah, that's where I'm definitely picking up most of the jobs.
Okay. So you do an audition for the audiobook of your choice, and the author picks you as the narrator. What happens after that?
So usually I kind of kick off the process just by starting a dialogue with the author and asking if there's anything in particular that they are visualizing for the story in terms of tone or in terms of how the characters sound or how they interact. And it varies from author to author. Some authors want to be very involved in that, and some are just like, I don't, just do whatever, do your thing, you know? And so, yeah, then I usually, I'll do like a full read through if I have time of the book, or at least kind of skim it, you know, for important parts, or, you know, in the case of working with you, I loved that there was a spreadsheet with the characters. Like that helped so much. Usually I don't get that. So usually I have to, you know, I go through and I'm like, okay, you know, here are the characters and here are their ages and here's, you know, so yeah, just kind of doing some of that. And yeah, then I usually just start things. Like I feel like probably it's different for every narrator, but I really approach it a lot like I would like a theater rehearsal or something, where I just like to try different things, you know. So I'll read one line like 15 times or whatever, and then go back in the editing process and be like, oh, I think, you know, that's the voice or that's the tone that I like the best, you know, for that character. So yeah, usually get in the studio and just start experimenting and see what comes out.
Yeah, that's perfect. I know during our experience, it was you actually record the main characters as voices and kind of asked, is this what you're looking for? And sometimes others are much like, oh yeah, that's perfect. And other times like, well, let's tweak this a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's to me, that's very much of the collaborative theatrical process, in that you have different people within the community or the project you're working on, and they have to bounce ideas off each other because they're working together on the same stage. And so if they're not on the same page, then the project doesn't come together very well. And in this case, I very much felt like sorry, I pressed a button.
Okay.
It very much felt like a great collaborative process for me. I would give you notes or ideas on a topic, and you know, it would work or it wouldn't. So
yeah, that was really nice. I actually really like that more collaborative feel, rather than feeling like I'm just kind of doing something all on my own and then I'm just going to turn it in and they'll either love or hate it. Right? So it was nice to have some guidance throughout that process.
Yeah, I think it's good. It helps everybody do a better job on the thing that they're enjoying to do. So you've done all the recording. Do you do your own editing as well?
I do, yes. That has probably been the most interesting, like, learning process type thing, because I'm not a super technical person. But when I decided I wanted to do this, like, I knew that I was going to have to get really serious about learning editing. So it's just been, you know, watching a lot of YouTube tutorials and listening to a lot of sound engineers talk about their process and use terms that I don't even know, and and like learning what all those things mean. So I think it's been good. It's been really fun, but the editing is definitely the toughest part of the process and kind of the most arduous. Yeah.
That's probably the most time-consuming part of it, in my opinion. Because I do limited editing for the podcast that I do. I first do it as a video podcast, and I grab the audio, you know, cut out all the weird sounds I make as you speak normally.
Yes, right.
And it's just kind of a pain to kind of scroll through it all multiple times to try to catch them all. And even then, sometimes you miss things. And so I totally understand what you mean by editing is a very specific skill. So I was kind of just whether or not you did it yourself or like you outsourced it, because I know a lot of the other auditions that I got, they're like, oh no, I quicken the process by outsourcing the editing. It didn't cost me a little bit of money. They do it so much better and faster that it's worth my time to kind of outsource it a little bit. And I'm like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense, because it is a very specific skill set. And sure, you can do it yourself. But like you said, I'm in the same boat as you. I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing when it comes to editing or sound engineering at all. I can kind of fake it, and it's a passable, you know, thing. But I'm like, oh, okay, maybe, you know, this is not, maybe I should leave that to the professionals occasionally.
Yeah, I should probably think about outsourcing it at this point, because it would give me more time to actually focus on the performance aspect and to be able to like take more jobs and, be outsourcing the editing. So that might be what I choose to do in the future.
So I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that that's the thing that I talked to the other audiobook narrators about. Like, and they're like, yeah, this is just a natural progression of stuff. Like, you get a lot of projects, and it's like you only have so much time in your days to do everything. And so if you can push some of that out to somebody else and they can do it faster and better, then that means you can do more projects, which means more money overall for you as an artist. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Well, maybe I need to talk to some of these people about where they outsource. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is kind of the same places that you look for other jobs. I mean, Fiverr is a great place for just one-time gigs. I'm sure there are other resources like ACX for just editors or something. I'm sure you could also shoot Jeff Hayes as he does Sound Booth Live. He's the only other audiobook narrator I know personally, but he has a team of editors who actually do editing for him as well. So maybe you could drop him a line and say, hey, wonder what your guys cost. Like, what would they charge?
Okay, yeah, cool. Maybe I'll do that then. Yeah,
that's definitely a possibility. Okay, so you've done the editing, you've done the recording, and we talked a little bit about how much you collaborate with the author in the project. It's kind of dependent upon how much involvement they want. I know personally, I was like, oh, I want to be involved. I want to help make this the best project possible. And I kind of hope that it wasn't too big of a nagging Nelly for you. But I loved what you did.
It was great. Thank you. No, I like I said, I loved having someone to collaborate with, and I actually feel more comfortable with that than I do with just kind of, being on my own and just hoping that it'll turn out the way they want it, right?
Yeah. And do you think it comes from like your theatrical background that you're used to working with other people to make things great?
Yeah, I think definitely. I've never known a performance environment that didn't involve 20 different people having opinions on everything. Like, it just makes more sense to me.
Strong opinions, yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, that's good. So I'm glad that you're the kind of professional who welcomes, notes from authors. Because to me, that was another thing that I really liked about our collaboration, is that you weren't. You took what I said, and sometimes you were like, yeah, this is okay, sure, no problem. Delete this, rewrite this, or re-record this, and do a different tone here and there for this particular line. And that was kind of, you're like, okay, I enjoy hearing from you. So I'm like, okay, that made me feel better as a first-time audiobook collaborator to feel like, okay, it's okay for me to say things. Because I know a lot of people who are, especially authors, who very much write alone. They're insular. It's kind of an insular thing, in that you're taking the stories from your brain and putting it on paper. And yeah, sometimes you get some feedback from editors that you pay or from beta readers, but for the most part, it's very much you're the god of your world. And so sometimes when you work with other people, you don't get to be that. And some authors don't feel comfortable. And so it's good for me to hear that, okay, you're the type of person that was okay listening and collaborating, because it made me feel more comfortable with the project on a personal note.
Well, good. Yeah, I mean, it's your story and it's your characters. Like, I want them to sound the way you want them to sound. Like, that's that just makes the most sense, I think.
Perfect. I thank you very much. Okay, we'll back to, are you working on anything currently as far as like a narrator or an author?
Yeah, currently for the narration, I am doing, like I said, I just started on book 2 of the List Conspiracy. And so I think I'm getting better now at like just kind of focusing on one project at a time. So I'm going to do book 2 of that, and then I'm going to do book 3 of that. And, just kind of keep it at that, like one month at a time. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's I prefer that methodology as well. It's like, it helps you to focus on just that thing, and then it's done, and then you move on. I'm that kind of person too, where I have to be one project at. I know some authors will write like 3 or 4 books at the same time, and I'm like, that just seems like you're splitting your brain into different personalities, and I can't do that yet, hopefully.
I've always been like that, and I like it to an extent, but I think either as I get older or something is happening where I'm like, no, I would rather be able to focus on one thing at a time. I don't enjoy the split personalities phase too. So.
Okay, I'm glad we are in agreement. Okay, let's see. So we've talked about things you're working on, what it's about. Are you? I think you're. Do you audiobook narrate full time or part time?
I'd say part-time. It kind of depends. Like there are definitely periods of my life where I'm narrating as much or more as I would, for like a full-time job, and then there are other times where there isn't as much work to be done in that facet of my life. So I would say part-time because the work kind of comes and goes.
Okay, so it's a very feast or famine kind of situation, at least when in the beginning of your career, like until you get like a regular, back catalog of people waiting for you to become available. I can see that it is kind of a feast or famine kind of situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, voices. This is the question I was kind of curious about. Where do your voices come from as an audiobook narrator? Because I mean, in Adventures in Terra, there were like 20 characters, I think, with different voices: men, women, magical creatures, fairies, trolls, goblins. Where do you come up with your voices from?
Gosh, I don't know. Sometimes, like I said, it's just about like getting into the studio and just hearing what comes out of my mouth. And sometimes it's terrible. Like sometimes I'll be like, I'll just start speaking in a voice and then I'll stop myself and I'll be like, no, like that is a terrible sound. Like why would anybody talk like that? But so it's a lot of experimenting, but also a lot of for something like this that is grounded in some of the characters are grounded in archetypes that are familiar. Like I remember asking you towards the beginning of the process, about the troll. And I'm like, so do I just do the stereotypical big dumb troll voice? And you were like, yeah, pretty much that's, so there are characters that I'm at least familiar with, from mythology or literature or movies and television or something where I think that has a lot of influence. But yeah, other than that, I think I probably draw a lot of inspiration too from my mother, who used to read books to my brother and sister and me, and she was so good. I mean, she still is, but she just doesn't read to us all anymore because we're all grown up. But such a good reader and just had the most incredible voices for everyone to the point where she read most of the Harry Potter series to us. And she was so good at it that when I eventually heard the audiobooks with Jim Dale, who, won Grammys and awards and stuff for what he was doing, I was kind of disappointed in him. I was like, oh, my mom was better. I'm totally biased, but she was just, so good. So I think when I do narration now, probably a lot of, the voices that I have kind of come from what I heard from her over the years.
That is so adorably sweet, I have to say. My mom was better than the professional audiobook narrator for Harry Potter. So
she should totally have been allowed to narrate the Harry Potter audiobooks. Yeah.
She can do the black market version of Harry Potter. She'll record it all on her own.
Right.
Do the editing and you can release it out into the wild and we'll see whose numbers are better.
We'll see who's better. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's so cute. Would you mind if I asked you to do some of the voices from Adventures on Terra?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, okay, let's go with this is exciting for me, sorry. Mary, Vrax, and Armand.
Okay. So I don't really know what you want me to say, but as Mary, it was just being a cute little fairy. You gotta be super sarcastic because Armand says the dumbest things. And you just gotta hold him accountable for that. And Vrax, Vrax, I love him.
Vrax we worked on this voice because I wasn't sure at first how a kobold was supposed to sound. But just started doing a lot of hissing and high-pitched voices.
And Armand was just kind of a standard, he's our everyman guy. So he's kind of bumbling. I really like the scenes where he was kind of awkward around women. He's kind of oh gosh, you're you're just so pretty. I don't know what else to say, you know? His awkwardness was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy just to see, because I've always imagined, I mean, the voices you use have pictures in my brain. So I'm when I hear them, I'm seeing the story, but to see you do them on your own, I'm like, oh my, that's just another level of like enjoyment for me, just to see you working through the process. Like your facial features change and like your mannerisms change between Mary and Armand and Vrax. I'm like, oh, that's like, it brings a tear to my eye. Yeah, you should really think about like live streaming that, to be honest, because and that's something that Jeff Hayes does, who's the other audiobook narrator now. He actually live streams his recording process. Like when he's he does it on Twitch, and he does it on Facebook Live, and he does it on YouTube Live. And you know, it's just kind of a free way to advertise, and you're also working at the same time.
That's a really good idea. Yeah,
you do double duty, and the process is just so fascinating to people. To me especially, just to see like someone go through those character choices and see the alternatives that never kind of made it, or the process of just finding that right particular line and voice. And he also take audience questions and suggestions, and he also like use that as a platform to do auditions for books that maybe people didn't consider audiobook narrations for, because that, I mean, honestly, that happened to me. Like he saw that my book was doing well on Amazon. We broke top 100, and he's like, this week I'm just going to do this new book. And I saw it, like, that makes a lot of sense. And I kind of had to talk to some other authors about like, the financial aspects of like what was the best route for whether it's going to be royalty sharing or just straight paying out a narrator. But once I decided, I was like, but that was kind of what inspired me. And he does that for a lot of projects, and he'll get responses from authors saying, oh, I never thought about my book as an audiobook because I'm a writer and I'm not really into that thing, but I know a lot of other people are. And so he kind of used it as almost an audition platform, in addition to something that's entertaining for people who like his stuff. And so he's trying to create a brand for himself. Yeah. I should put the video camera on me instead of you. Sorry. He's trying to create a brand for himself and a platform for his work. So people know what Jeff Hayes is. And I think, oh, people can know what Jill Smith is as well, along the same lines, because you're just as entertaining with your characters.
That's actually a really cool idea. Of course, then it would mean that the whole world would know how often I burp while I'm recording, which I think from our past conversations is an issue for me. I
think those would be the highlights.
I think those would be the highlights too. Yeah, I think
you get a lot of, like, every burp you have, like you just see a flood of likes going across the screen.
Yeah. Okay. I think, I guess I'm ready for the world to know that about me.
They have to know at some point. I mean, Jill,
right.
It's a part of you.
It's just who I am.
Yeah, they love you, or they love you and your burps, or they don't love at all. So I mean,
exactly, and I don't need them in my life if they don't love me and my burps. So.
Yeah, and what's not to love? I have to say,
it's beautiful. Okay. Yeah,
it is. It is. I have to agree. Okay, for you, I ask, what are the easiest and hardest things about audiobook narrating?
I think the easiest thing for me is, I think because I just have such a huge love of reading and writing, that I just get really, really excited about stories in general. So it's typically really easy for me to pick up a book and connect to it. And just like, when things are going well, that's the best feeling, when the author has written characters that come across very clearly on the page, and like you as the narrator feel a connection with them. And it's just easy to hear their voices and understand their journey and bring them to life. Hardest thing is editing. But I guess, the hardest thing about the narration process would, is just if there are moments where the author's intentions are not as clear through their words, or their characters are not as, just don't come through as fully and richly, like to try to, it just takes doing some homework to try to figure out, like, okay, so there's not a lot of information about this character here. How am I going to still create like a full life for them, as a performer? And I've been super lucky to, work on books where the characters are really easy to connect to. And I don't have many moments like that where I feel kind of confused or like, who is this person? What am I supposed to be doing here? So yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. And I agree editing is a lot harder than recording. Like recording is just
Yes.
you press record and you go do your thing.
Right.
And all the bumps and giggles or whatever are there. But editing is go back like 4 or 5 times. And honestly, it takes me at least 3 to 4 times as long to edit as it is to record. And that's just the process of my not doing this professional. I don't have any skill banks that I had to learn this on the go. I had to learn all the little all those little buttons on the editing software do. So it was it was definitely a learning curve.
Right. We understand that about each other. Yeah, good.
So I totally get that that's the right. And a lot of people don't understand that when they think of an audiobook, they think, oh, some professional just does one pass and they hit record and then they get paid. What an easy job. And I'm like, no, that's not it at all.
You do so much stuff afterwards. I had no idea that my mouth made that many noises when I spoke until I started listening to my own recordings. It's like, oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of breathing sounds and pops and like, wow, those all exist, and you don't realize how much noises your nose makes when you're breathing on your mic. You're like, oh, that's distracting.
Exactly. Yeah. And every time you move or every time you shift on your chair. Yeah.
Yeah, or heaven forbid you forget that the mic's right in front of you and you move to the side a little bit, then it's like, oh, I have to record that whole thing again.
Right, because now it sounds like I was talking out in the distance. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, there's a million things, and that's just for like regular recording. And then there's the additional layer of what you do, which is create characters. I mean, you're getting base material, which are words on a page, but you as a narrator, you have to create depth to characters. You have to create emotional tones. Is this a sad scene? Is this a happy scene? Is she being sarcastic? Which is usually the case with Mary in my stories. But there are some other emotional tones within the story. Then I'm like, that I just like, oh my God, Joe just does this amazing. Like, I feel so sad right now. And it was all because of just the layers in the characters that you created. And I'm like, that's definitely a skill that I don't know, because I thought about doing it myself I'm like, I could save a couple $1,000s if I just narrated this myself. And I tried it and I'm like, oh no, this is I do not have this skill. And because I thought the same thing, like, oh, I read books to kids. I do funny voices, and it's not the same thing at all.
Yeah. It's a really interesting world. I remember a lot of the things that I read before I got into audiobook narration, would talk about the idea of, like, a lot of beginning narrators think that the most important thing is to do the funny voices or to do the different voices so that you distinguish the characters that way. And I read a lot of things kind of advising narrators against that. They're like, don't necessarily do all the wacky voices to distinguish them, but make sure you understand the characters' emotions, in that particular moment, and kind of let it happen naturally. So I think, that's been really helpful to me to try to keep in mind, is that it's more about that connection with the story and what the characters are going through in that moment than it is about trying to do a funny voice. But as I said, what I liked about Terra was there was a lot of room to still do the funny voices, while also, getting to do scenes that were more emotional or had different fluxes of emotion. So yeah, it was really nice.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. Like there are a million and one things you can do with the character's voice, but unless you understand the character itself, they don't connect necessarily to what that character is saying necessarily. You don't need a funny voice necessarily to give depth to a character's voice. You can do like the same basically tone, but change the pacing, change your emotional influx on it.
Speech patterns. Yeah.
You just have a million and one possibilities, and they don't all have to be super funny, goofy sounding children's characters necessarily. I mean, a lot of the ones in my story are because they're fantasy creatures like Mary or Diblix or some of the halflings. Like, there are opportunities there for just fun, goofy characters or Rax, but they're also regular people, like Mary or Sonia, which is a love interest, or just the other female characters. I was actually surprised when it was totaling up that the number of characters. Oh, I have just about half female, and I should slightly more than half are women and half are men, which is a surprise to me because I'm a guy author, and so even I would have assumed I'd have more
Yeah.
male centric characters, and it's not the case in my story, which is another reason that I chose a female narrator over a male narrator. Like some of the responses when I put on ACX, when I check the box that says, "Oh, female narrators apply," like some of the female narrators are like, "Are you sure that you want a female narrator for this thing?" And some of the male narrators were like, "Are you sure you want female narrators to audition for this as well?" And I'm like, why wouldn't I want like the best of everybody to try to audition for this thing before I decide? Why would I immediately, cut out half the talent pool? In my opinion, so I'm like, oh,
no, I was really happy to see that it was open to female narrators, because I don't know, there are a lot of stories that I would really like to narrate that happen to have a male protagonist or something, and and I understand if certain authors or publishers want the gender of the narrator to match the gender of the protagonist, but I also think that I've heard audiobooks, where male characters were narrated brilliantly by female narrators or vice versa. And yeah, I like that it was open to any possibility.
Yeah, and I think I kind of lucked out because I if I had just done dudes, I would have got a good narrator. I'm not saying I wouldn't, but I wouldn't have gotten an amazing narrator. And I'm glad I took the opportunity to look at both sides of it, gaining both pools, I should say, before we decided, because otherwise I wouldn't have gotten you. And your voices are just, tone perfect, pitch perfect, and I would have missed out on the entire opportunity if I had just gone with what other people had said necessarily. And I also get what you're saying in that some authors like the male voice, like they like the deep, tones and richness.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's cool for the project. But on mine, I'm like, he's a kid, he's a teenager, so having someone who can do that register as the main character, that's what I was concerned with. And there were just so many other women in the story that I'm like, those characters are just as important to me, so I'm like, why not? You know what I mean? So I'm glad the project worked out the way it did.
Yes, me too.
Okay, let's see. You're narrating a book series. Do you think it's different, a different experience narrating a book series than it is just a one-off project?
A little bit in some ways. And like what I love about it is obviously getting a chance to return to characters I'm already familiar with. And it's great. It's great to be starting book 2 of a series where I can just kind of dive right into it and don't have to go through that initial like, what is everyone going to sound like? Because I've already done that. And it does involve a little bit more just like organization on my part and making sure that I remember how different characters sound. If you're doing a one-off book and there's a character who's only there for like 2 lines, then you can just kind of like do voice and kind of, let it go. But maybe there's like a one-off, or like maybe there's a character in book 1 who I thought was just there to be a waiter in this one scene. And then in book 2, they end up, being a major character. And so I have to make sure that the voice I did for those 2 lines in book 1 is a voice that's sustainable and accurate, for that character once they become a bigger part of the story. So yeah, it just involves a little bit more organization and keeping track of who's who, and not only what role will they play in the first book, but what role will they play throughout the series.
Perfect. And do you keep samples of those original voices around just for reference, or how do you do it? Or do you just re-listen to the audiobook?
I try to keep samples around. I'm not as good about this as I should be, but I do try, because it makes things easier if I do. But the way it is right now, I kind of have to go back and I have to look at the actual book and be like, this character spoke in chapter 2. Let's find chapter 2 of the audiobook and fast forward and, try to find this part where they speak. So yeah, I should keep more samples, definitely.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it seems like a way to do it. Like just have a bunch of like character samples in like a file in a folder, and those are the things you draw from. So you can do it whatever you want to. I was just curious about it.
It seems so easy. You're right. It sounds like the perfect solution, and yet I rarely remember to do it.
Sorry. I was just thinking because in the second book of Adventures on Terra, like characters come back from like the first book, like in like the first couple chapters, Allison the Alchemist comes back, and Harold the Tailor comes back, and those are characters that pull in addition, like the main 3 of like Rax, Mary, and Armand. those to come back as like people who are they're in need of rescuing from Rustrian or from the bad guys. So they're a returning voice and think, oh yeah, I never thought about that as a narrator. Like you had to kind of keep a back catalog where like some informational sources, like what did these people sound like again? I can't remember.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, well, I'm glad those characters will be back. That's exciting.
Yes, they haven't died yet.
Good. I know, he kind of left us hanging at the end there about who's still around. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a small cliffhanger, but I didn't think it was too huge of a cliffhanger. Like people were going to riot at me, and nobody has yet. Most of them are just like, "Oh, thank you for writing such a great book. This is my first introduction to LitRPG, and I can't wait to read more of it." I'm like, "Oh, that makes me feel nice as a first time creative person."
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I know. I'll have to get more LitRPG recommendations from you since this was my first book in that genre.
Oh no, that's a rabbit hole that I delve into. That's kind of the idea of most of this podcast, is that I review LitRPG books on a weekly basis that come out on Amazon, and I just tell people about them. So it's kind of the thing that I do. So if you ask for recommendations, I have like 160 at this point.
You've got a whole bunch of podcasts I could listen to. Yeah,
a ton. And so
perfect.
And there are a lot more writers just in the last few months who have come from other genres. One of the authors in the LitRPG community was featured on the fantasy and sci-fi marketing podcast, popular marketing podcast for authors, and he kind of brought it to people's attention. This is a underserved genre, and there's potential income for writers if they can do it well. And so there's been a lot of influx from people from romance or from sci-fi or fantasy or from other more established genres who decided, oh, I'll take a swing at LitRPG, and some of them are good and some of them not so much. But it's part of the it's part of the process, I think, on my end to say, oh, these are the things that you can improve on to make your story better, because most of them are just they draw their tropes from a slightly different community, and if they don't understand this genre, then it's harder for them to be successful. They're still good storytellers, but they're not feeding the needs of this particular. They're still kind of trying to do the things that they saw as being successful in their other genre books. And I'm like, no, you can kind of do that, but you start to meet these other things, which is the case in any kind of genre series.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Okay, let's see, what else do I have? Oh, authors. We could ask some other questions for you. Like, do you still have time to read at all at this point?
Yes, I do make time. Not as much as I used to, which is really sad. But it's still okay, because it's like, even not having as much time as I used to means that I still get to read a lot of books. So it's all good.
That's good. But so anything you're reading now that you're particularly enjoying, or any kind of genre that you love in particular?
I am not super picky about genre. I like to read a lot of different things. I guess I probably read the most in literary fiction, whatever that means, but the literary genre, like that's probably what I read the most of. But I've been reading The Sellout by Paul Beatty, which is so good and so funny. And His Bloody Project, which is a historical thriller. I think the author is Roddy McRae. And yeah, it just deals with horrible triple homicide in Scotland in the 1800s. And kind of told almost like a courtroom drama type thing, trying to uncover why this teenager murdered these 3 people. So that's been,
that sounds
been
interesting.
Reading some good stuff lately. Love it.
Doesn't sound cheerful, but it sounds very interesting.
It's not cheerful. I don't read a lot of cheerful books, I'll be honest. I really have a thing for like really depressing stories. So
it sounds so. I mean, I don't know you that well, I suppose, but you seem like a rather cheerful person whenever I've talked to you. So, but like that says something, I think, about your inner self. That you're finding that need that through those works.
I have to get the darkness out somehow. Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to learn that about you. I know not to walk down dark alleys with you. That's totally cool.
Right. Or maybe I'm a great person to have around because I've read so many books about murder and terrible things that, I might know how to handle a situation like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I like that much better than what I thought. That's much more. It makes me happy with that anyway. Okay, so those are some of your favorite authors. Let's see. Oh, what are your thoughts on the independent publishing versus traditional publishing kind of dynamic? Because you come from both sides of it, I think. Because you said you do some audiobook narration through a publisher, but you also do it as an independent narrator as well, and you also write as well. So I'm kind of curious as to your viewpoints on, independent publishing versus like traditional publishing.
I think it's one of those things that either one can work really well depending on the person, depending on the author or narrator. From a narration perspective, I have not seen much difference between working with publishers versus self-published authors. Like it's been an equally pleasant, well-organized experience, either way. As a writer, I think that there are definitely merits to both. I think self-publishing has been really helpful to people like me who write queer fiction or any fiction where you have traditionally been told by the gatekeepers that this is not going to sell, that there's not a market for people of your identity, for characters of your identity. So sorry, we can't take it. And self-publishing is, provided a really wonderful opportunity to prove those people wrong and to be like, no, actually, if you just take a chance on it, there's a huge market for queer fiction. So I think like in that respect, self-publishing has been amazing. I think it's, really great for authors who are very marketing savvy or, people who really like to have creative control over the entire process. I know as a writer, I think I still prefer working with publishers just because, like we said, I do really enjoy that collaborative feel, which you can still get as a self-published author. You can still hire an editor who works closely with you and, cover artists and everything. But I do think I like having some of those details taken care of for me. And I do like that there are still publishers who can get authors exposure in places that it's hard to do on your own. So like working with a publisher that allows me to, to get more mainstream exposure or advertising in places that I don't have connections with on my own is helpful. So yeah, I think, I think it's been fascinating to watch the rise of self-publishing because I kind of remember when it first started taking off and sort of being like, is it like, cool, is this going to work? Is this definitely going to be a thing? And it looks like it is here to stay, So yeah, I think there are a lot of really good things about it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think what you said about the gatekeepers kind of controlling what types of fiction or literature go out in the world has kind of gone away with self-publishing. Basically, anybody who wants to write a story can upload it to the internet, I think through Amazon and from some other self-publishing network, and then it's going to live or die on its own merits. And that's very much been the case within the LitRPG community, and that 95% of the authors who write in our genre are self-publishers. Very few of them have done any type of traditional, and that's mostly because it's still a relatively small community. I mean, even though they're super rabid readers and they'll purchase 100 books in a month sometimes.
Yeah,
but it's still it's not a big enough slice of the pie for some big publisher to take the time to send through marketing and those traditional outlets where they spend a bunch of money to try to promote a book. And I understand their perspective in that they don't have infinite amounts of money, so they have to be selective about what projects they're going to spend their limited funds on. On the other side of it, of course, is that as a self-publisher, you're your marketer, your advertiser, your editor, your writer, and that's the flip side of the coin. And yes, it's easy, but to get into the door, but yes, whether you succeed or fail is going to depend upon how much effort you're going to put into your project and whether or not you can connect to a community of some sort. And I think I've personally been super lucky in that I kind of had an in through the podcast to this community and saying, oh, I'm giving you something because I love it, which is the podcast.
Yeah.
I was reviewing a long time before I decided to write anything, because I'm just a fan of our genre. And I had a deep love and passion, which I hope comes across in the podcast. But in addition to that, I felt such an impetus to create a story that I'm not a creative person, to be honest. I'm a math engineering kind of dude who does a lot of logic stuff. That's my wheelhouse in general. I've done education, I've done a bunch of other things, but writing has never been my thing personally. And so for me to take that step as a first-time author and to find some kind of success was absolutely mind-blowing to me. And it's only because of that community that just loves these books and is so welcoming to people who are going to be first-time authors. And I think that this genre in particular is lucky, and it wouldn't really exist without self-publishing being an option, because I can't. Right. I really doubt that any real publisher was going to say, "Oh, your silly little fantasy book about video game stuff, we'll publish that." I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But because you can self-publish, you can let the audience decide whether they want your stuff or not. And I think that resonates with a lot of different smaller niche communities, even though they're not big and you're not going to make like hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, you can make a pretty decent living by servicing that community that you're a part of.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's spot on. Like, and it's exposed readers to so many different subgenres and different new things that, that we didn't even know we liked. And yeah, I think it's been really good for just expanding the number of voices and the diversity of the voices out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like it. And actually, without self-publishing, I don't think I would have ever written something, because I don't think I would have had the nerve to submit something to a publisher and gotten a formal letter back at some point. It's just less intimidating for someone like me who's just not experienced as a writer but still wanted to do something and would put the time into it. So I'm like, oh yeah, this I wouldn't have written anything without the opportunity as a self-publisher. Okay, let's see. Advice.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Do you let me ask you, do you market the audiobooks that you narrate, or like the books that you publish on your own, or how do you market the stuff that you do?
Audiobooks, I'm still kind of figuring out what to do with all that, because I don't have, I don't really have a base of people who know me as a narrator under the name Jill Smith. What I have are, readers in like the queer romance genre who know me as J.A. Rock, and I'm pretty open with them. I'm like, oh, hey, so I also do narration under this name, if you ever want to check it out. But there's a certain extent to where hardcore fans of a genre, there's a certain amount of crossover to other genres, but sometimes, people kind of stay within their own genre. So, I definitely feel that I have readers who are very supportive of what I'm doing as a narrator, and they're like, that's awesome. That's great that you're doing that. But, they don't necessarily want to run out and buy, a thriller or a science fiction book, or something like that. They still want, a romance novel if they're listening to a book. So I think that's kind of where I am right now in terms of I want to figure out how to market myself as a narrator in addition to marketing myself as a writer who also happens to do this other thing, on the side. So yeah, marketing books that I've self-published I'm not a great marketer, and I know that about myself. I just try to listen to people who are good marketers when they have advice or things to say or offer to put me in their newsletter or whatever. I just try to take advantage of opportunities like that as they come along. But I do not have good marketing advice at all.
No, that's okay. Honestly, I'm kind of the same way in that this podcast is probably the limit of the marketing that I do. And mostly it's not about me. It's mostly about other people's work. And this is kind of it for me, to be honest. I try to do a newsletter because I've heard other authors say, oh, newsletters are important. Or, posting groups or create websites or whatever for work. But I'm kind of in the same boat. I don't know how to market, and I understand why people pay other people to do marketing for them, because it's a very unique skill set as a successful marketer. You can throw money at anything and you'll have some success.
Right.
When you have limited funds as a self-publishing author or as an audiobook narrator, then it's like, oh, I have to be selective about how I spend that money, if I want to spend money at all.
Yes.
Like I think social media allows for a very inexpensive way of connecting with your community, like, you know, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, whatever the case is. Like, those things are free. And so as long as you can connect to your community in those ways, I think that's a very inexpensive way of promoting your work. But I think more than that, the people I found who had the most success within those platforms are the people that create a community and not just spam people about their books. Like they create a place for people to talk, for people to discuss that particular genre, or just communicate with the author. And I think those places are the ones that have the most success. You create a recurring group of people who are interested in your work and who are willing to support you by purchasing your stuff, and not just casually like saying, oh yeah, this is another ad from somebody.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. Exactly. The queer romance community, I think, is so close knit. You know, like we're all kind of bound together by the fact that we couldn't necessarily find the kind of books we wanted to read for a long time, and then suddenly we could, and now all we do is talk to each other all the time about, you know, about those books. And it's exciting. It's exciting to have that shared identity and that shared love of, you know, certain kinds of stories. And I think that helps more than anything, is like you said, just being part of that community, just being visible within the community. I know as a reader, I have never bought a book because somebody spammed me with ads, you know, or because like on my Twitter every day, this person was like, check out this book I wrote, check out this book I wrote. Like, I've never bought a book for that reason. And so it's hard for me to conceive of the idea that like people would buy a book for that reason. Like, you know, I'm much more likely to buy a book if I've talked to the author, if I know the author, if I know they're a smart person and, you know, have like clearly written an awesome book, or, you know, more likely to buy things, you know, that are recommended to me based on things that I've enjoyed in the past. So I think everybody finds success with different marketing tactics and different levels of marketing. I just know I don't feel super comfortable being that person who's like, did you see this thing I wrote? Like, you should buy it. You should definitely buy it. I wrote this amazing thing. Like,
here's my book. Can you go purchase it? You can purchase it on Amazon. And yeah.
I'll help you out. People should definitely purchase that book. They should push that book in the background right there. Buy that one.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very interesting experience, because like we talked about this already, but as a self-publisher, you're your own marketer, you're your own publisher, you're your own, you know, everything editor. So it's something like a lot of self-publishers have to, a skill set they have to learn at least a little bit. Otherwise, their book just sits. It could be an amazing work of art, but if nobody ever sees it, nobody ever, you know, even takes a chance to look at it, then it's kind of a wasted opportunity, you know, for the community. And I think what you said about your community and our community are very much the same, in that we're both excited about our genres because nothing was servicing our needs before. And so once it does, we all get super excited about the things that we love about our community, our genres, and that creates a community for us to pull from. Like, oh, what are your recommendations? Oh, this is the thing I'm looking at. Why do you like it? Oh, I like it because of this. And, you know, there are conversations you can create. You can create a community of friends, almost online Facebook friends or whatever. But there's still people that feel, if you feel a connection to, because you have that thing, whether it's, you know, LitRPG or something else, you have that in common and you feel that connection, and it makes you a part of a community instead of just being, here's a thing I wrote, go buy it because I have to pay bills.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of it. Okay, perfect. One last question for you. As far as audiobook narration goes, if somebody wanted to get into the audiobook narration business game, what advice would you give them?
I would probably reiterate some things that I've already said, such as picking projects that you feel a connection with, so that you don't feel that you're struggling to forge that connection or struggling to, like, you know, slog through this book that you're not excited about. Because I do think things like that, even if you're a good actor and good at like hiding your true feelings, it's something that might come across like in your performance, that you're not excited about this story. So yeah. And, you know, what I said before, the advice that I got about not making everything about the funny voices, making sure that these are characters that you can have an emotional connection with, so that you're not thinking so hard about like, okay, like what is my voice doing, but you're thinking more of like, where is the character in this moment? And then those things naturally come through in your voice. So yeah, I guess that's one of the most helpful pieces of advice that I got, taking your projects wisely and making sure that you have a connection to the work that you're doing.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for answering all my questions, for taking the time to talk to me for a good hour and a half at this point. It's always fun for me just to talk to
oh my
people.
gosh, it went so fast. Yeah.
That's usually the case with the conversation. And in my experience, it's just, we have a nice time talking to each other. And I like that about this thing that I do as far as the podcast goes. It gives me an opportunity that I probably would have never had, just to talk to some cool people, whether they're audiobook narrators or writers within the genre, or just anybody else who I can get to come on the podcast sometimes. But it's
great.
fun. Yeah. I honestly, I don't think I would have written anything if I hadn't talked to like 20 different authors already about their experiences as a writer, and they did marketing, or how easy it was, to self-publish on Amazon. Because it kind of gave me a base of experience to say, oh, this isn't as hard as I thought it was to me. There's no gatekeeper, so why not try it out?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, well, thanks so much for having me on. It's been really fun to talk to you, and I'm really happy, that your writing has been successful, and I'm obviously looking forward to the rest of the series.
and I hope our project, because I consider this our project as far as the audiobook goes, I hope it's as successful as the book was. So thank you very much for the time. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about before that I haven't included at all?
I don't think so.
No. Okay. Perfect. Then
I'm good if you're good.
Where can people find the stuff that you do? Where can they find your books? Do you have a Facebook page, a Twitter page at all?
So as a narrator, I'm pretty much only on ACX right now. So you can, look me up as Jill Smith on ACX to get like work samples and stuff like that. So I don't have Twitter or Facebook as a narrator, but yeah, to connect with me as an author, I'm on Twitter and Facebook, Twitter at JA Rock Author, and Facebook as JA Rock. And you can, people can find stuff about the narrating work that I'm doing there also, since I'm still kind of haven't separated those identities yet. I'm still like being JA Rock and being like, also check out my narration as Jill Smith. So yeah.
No, I very much understand what you're saying, because I have an author page for Ramon Mejia, and then I have Ramon Mejia as everything else I do, as like a podcaster, as a regular reader, commentator, whatever it is. And sometimes they feel very different, and I'm kind of uncomfortable answering questions that are directed to Ramon Mejia as Ramon Mejia, because I feel like I'm almost eavesdropping on a conversation about the author portion of my life, and I'm like, oh, it's just a weird dichotomy sometimes. So I get what you mean.
It is. It's hard to have these different identities. Yeah.
Okay, so perfect. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. Jill Smith, if you want to say goodbye to everybody, I will sign off.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for watching.
And everybody who's been watching today, thank you very much for listening to me and Jill talk about something we're passionate about, Adventures on Terra in this particular case. It'll be out by the time you watch or listen to this. Hopefully it'll be out by then. But if not, thank you for taking the time to listen to me talk about LitRPG. And until I can see you guys again or talk to you, remember to go read some LitRPG, folks. Goodbye.